Hello and welcome to the Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Cities Skylines 2. In this series, I'll teach you the mechanics of the game and discuss how to build realistic cities by building the city of New Tutoria. I'm going to try to keep this series very organized and predictable, and the plan is for this city and series to last as long as Cities Skylines 2 receives updates. In fact, we're going to come back to this city with each DLC release and deep dive into how it changes the game. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to begin by going over the basics of the game and build a small city that can sustain itself. And I'll build in a slow and measured way, so feel free to build along with me if you'd like to. And if you're excited about this series, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes of the series. And without any further ado, let's jump right in. When you begin a new game, you're immediately presented with the most consequential decision that you can make for your city, the map that you build it on. And this is an important decision to make because the map can have an influence on the story that you're able to tell with your city. And that's because 4 variables can only be changed on this screen: the climate of your city, the latitude of your city, the amount of buildable space that you have, and the natural resources that are available to you. So if you want to build a city with a warm weather climate, make sure that you're building on a warm weather map. Latitude will have an impact on when your seasons occur. Buildable area will have an influence on the size of your city. If you want to build a sprawling city, make sure you have a large buildable area. And the natural resources will have an impact on which industries are viable in your community. And only one natural resource can be added after the fact: forestry. The rest are a finite resource. In Cities Skylines 2's base game, 10 maps are available. However, you'll notice I have 2 additional maps, San Francisco and Tampere. Those 2 maps are available as part of a DLC and as a pre-order bonus respectively. For this series, we're going to build on the Lakeland map. One of the reasons that I like this map is that it has a large buildable area. It also has an abundance of natural resources, including forestry, which is something I want to focus on in this city. I also love the amount of coastland that it has, which is something that we're going to try to exploit when we build up a tourism industry in the future. You might notice that we do not have shipping connections available. This is something that we can add after the fact, a feature that's new for Cities Skylines 2. Once you select your map, you're able to name your city, select your theme, determine the side of the road that your citizens will drive on, determine whether natural disasters will occur in your community or not, and decide whether or not you'll play in sandbox mode by unlocking all buildings and all money. And once you've made those decisions, you can start your game. So here we are in our city for the very first time, and I really love that Cities Skylines 2 invites you to start building right away. You've got this little starter grid right here, a fresh water source, and your power from an outside connection. It's really everything that you would need to get going. But I don't want to take the bait. I want to zoom out and survey our map just a little bit. There's a couple of things that you can see just by looking at the map, such as where your forests are. You can see that right here, we've got a really dense forest. And if I'm going to build a forestry industry in this community, this is probably where I'm going to focus on. I also see a bit of forest right here, and if I want to have a really natural development pattern, maybe I don't want to develop the forest area first. Maybe I want to have a parallel road going along the side of the forest. And then you might click on the info views and realize that nearly everything is locked, but there's 2 more things that you can look at. Starting with your roads menu, you can take a look at your contours. Right here, we've got a pretty significant hill, so in my mind, this might be one of the last places that we develop, as well as over here, another significant hill. This one's actually a bit steeper, and we can tell that because the contour lines are closer to one another. And then we've got this area right here that's really interesting. This obviously has very steep slopes, not good for development, but maybe good for a park in the future. The next thing I would look at is the zoning tool. And that might seem a little bit bizarre, but if you look at your industrial zone, you get to see this excellent view of where your wind blows and all of your aquifers. So this is really important for a couple of reasons. If you're going to build industrial right off the bat, you want to make sure that the pollution will not be carried by air into your residential districts. So if we're going to build industrial on this little island right here, we probably want to build it back here. And if we don't want to do that, we probably want to wait until we can buy additional tiles over here and maybe focus our industrial along the waterfront in this area. The other thing that we can see, like I mentioned, is these little aquifers, your underground groundwater sources. And these are important because you can pollute these. So if you intend on using these for something like drinking water, you want to make sure that you do not place industrial right on top of them. This could also be helpful if you're going to place a geothermal power plant because those require groundwater sources. So this can help you figure out where you'd place that power plant. So if I were going to do one of those, I'd probably place it right here. So it's not a ton of information that you're getting up front, but it's enough to make some slightly educated decisions about where you're going to place things. And based on what we've just seen, I know that when we can buy additional tiles, I'm probably going to buy these ones first, place our industrial districts right here, and once we unlock garbage management, I'll probably place that over here as well. So now that we have a better understanding understanding of our map, let's start building. And though we could just expand this starter grid that they gave us, I think we're going to try to build something ourselves. The roadway network of your city is really going to give it its personality. It's going to influence the amount of connectivity that your city has, and it will give your city a certain feeling. And I want to demonstrate that by actually creating a couple of grids from real life cities. I've created 5 different grids here that are from real life cities. The first is from Barcelona, and it's approximately 112 meters by 112 meters. Beneath that is the grid from Buenos Aires, which is 128 meters by 128 meters. To the right of that, we have the grid from Portland, which is 80 meters by 80 meters. And beneath both of those, we have the grid from New York City. This is 312 meters by 88 meters. And right next to that, we have Salt Lake City, clocking in at 240 meters by 240 meters. The reason I wanted to point this out is these different grids will have a significant impact on the amount of pavement that you have in your city, how connected your city is, and how it feels. I mean, if you build a city with Salt Lake City's grid, it's going to feel dramatically different than a city with Portland's grid. For this city, I'm thinking of doing something kind of in the middle. This grid right here is 112 meters by 88 meters, and it's the same grid that you see in Chicago, Illinois, and Jacksonville, Florida. And I think it's going to work really well for us. It's going to be flexible. We can break it up for parks and larger buildings when we want to, and still maintain that pedestrian connectivity that will make this a very walkable city. So now that we know the type of grid that we're going to be using, let's get building it. And I think I want to build first along this tree line. So I mentioned that this is going to be a really important focal point for us. I'm just going to draw this division road, and then we'll begin our grid probably closer to the waterfront. And here we go, we have our first few blocks ready to go. Now I was able to build this with all of my snapping toggles enabled, but you might find that it would be a lot easier for you to build these with half of your toggles off. So I think let's go through each of these toggles and I'll explain what they do. So the first button disables and enables all of your toggles. The second button snaps to existing geometry. Most of the time you'll probably want to have this enabled. This allows you to basically clip to the road and clip to intersections and things of that nature. The second toggle allows you to snap to cell length. So if I have this enabled only, you'll see that it's basically snapping every 8 meters. So this will allow you to maintain a nice tight grid, especially if you combine it with snap to zoning grid. So when I have these two enabled, you can see that I'm actually clipping to each of the corners of the grid, which can be really helpful if you want to maintain a nice tight grid. The other tool that I like to use with this is our snap to 90-degree angles. This can help ensure that you're actually staying at perfect 90-degree angles. The next option is snap to sides of buildings. And we don't have any buildings right now, so this one's a little bit difficult to demonstrate. But basically, if we did have a building, we could actually snap to the side of it and draw a road perfectly along the side of it. So I will demonstrate this in just a minute. That's basically what that tool does. And finally, we have snap to guidelines. And this can be really useful if you want to connect two specific roads to one another. For instance, let's say I wanted to connect this road right here into this road. I could find the guideline and find that this is actually where these two roads intersect. So if you're trying to just join two grids up, this can be incredibly useful. But for now, I just want to extend my grid a little bit further and then figure out how we deal with this entryway right here. So I will enable snapping to existing geometry, zoning cell length, 90s, guidelines, and snap to zoning grid. Now I'm likely going to disable the guidelines from time to time. Those can break your grid if you're not careful. Now you may be surprised that I didn't use the grid tool to create this grid. There's one primary reason for that. You lack a bit of control through here. If you don't want to get as precise as I did, this can be a valuable tool, but if you're trying to make something incredibly precise like I was, it's going to be a little more challenging to use this. Now let's clean this area up and I will get rid of this grid, and this is a good opportunity to highlight how the new delete tool works. Rather than deleting things one at a time, you can click and hold and drag over to where you want the deletion to end. I'd like that to end right here, and you can see that that entire area is glowing blue. That means that it will all be deleted at the same time. Now, an interesting thing with this new grid tool, which you can enable by clicking on this, if you already have a grid built, you can attach the grid tool to your existing grid. And if you are careful and deliberate with it, you can build really quickly. Now, I'm not going to be able to go many blocks over, but I know that this block is 112 meters wide. So I'll come over 112 meters, click which will end the tool from drawing a line this way and allow us to go this way. And then if I look at all the measurements, I can see that at the bottom, I have 120 meters. I'll just knock that over 1 unit. 112, all my roads are lining up. Hit enter, and I have 4 more blocks. So this can make expansion really simple for you. And that is a very large grid, and you might be surprised that I've built this much right off the bat, especially if you watch my original Beginner's Guide to Cities Skylines 1. And the reason why we're able to do this is Cities Skylines 2 actually gives you a lot of money to begin with, and the roads are fairly inexpensive from an initial upfront capital cost and an ongoing maintenance cost. So I would encourage you to think about your layout a bit this time around, and maybe even build basically a planning grid or a series of planning roads. You don't need to zone everything right away, but you can build up a fairly sizable city without worrying too much about it. Now I'm going to connect this road right about here to Birch Street. So I'll back that out. And now I want to perfectly align with this road right here. And you might notice it's clipping to either side of the road to each of the lanes. There's a simple solution here. We need to turn off snap to zoning cell length. And as soon as we disable that, we can snap to the lane on this side, the center of the road, and the lane on this side. And now I'm going to switch over to our simple curve tool. And I found the center point right here between the center lane here and the center lane here. I'm just going to pull this up and click right here and then link these up. We have the perfect curve. They might wonder, how do we get this road to be a bit better? We use our new replace tool, and this is one of my favorite additions to Cities Skylines 2, but once you get the hang of it, it's so powerful. Now with the replace tool, you can simply replace a road. This is kind of like the upgrade tool in Cities Skylines on steroids. So you can see that right here, we are snapping to one side of the road or the other. You might wonder why you'd want to do this. This could help you preserve a building or two. So that's a little bit of flexibility right there. If we turn off snap to zoning cell length and leave on snap to existing geometry, we can perfectly center this on our existing road. And that can be really beneficial as well. If we turn all of those off, we can actually slide this thing around quite a bit, which can give you just that little bit of space that you need to make a road possible that would have been previously impossible in Cities Skylines 1. In this case, we have a brand new grid, so I'm just going to use snap to existing geometry, perfectly center this, and I'm going to pull this and pull this back, and I'll upgrade all of those at once. And then to round things off, I want to begin a road that follows the coast. And for this, we're going to use our new continuous tool. It is incredibly valuable when you want to create a meandering road that follows a specific geography. And that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to click once to begin use of the tool. I'll click once to set the rear angle and then begin to follow the coast. And you can see that rear point, that rear angle, that 13 degrees is not changing. Then I'll click a second time and that will draw that first road. Now I can move along and you can see that that rear angle is still set. And I'll use that to draw one more road. And now to wind things down over here, I'm going to finish the grid up to this road. And one thing I like to do from time to time is just overshoot. So you can just draw a road that goes beyond where you actually intend to connect up so you can see your 90-degree angle. And I find this to be very helpful if I'm struggling to snap. And it's funny, in Cities Skylines 2, sometimes your best efforts will still result in slightly broken grids. And here's the thing, you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is a pretty good layout, and maybe we place a city service building or a park here to resolve the problem with our grid if it bothers us too much. And now that we have a nice little starter grid laid out, let's get to building some utilities. There are 3 basic utilities that we need to add to our city before we can get it growing, and that's power, water, and sewer. So we'll begin with power, and there are 2 ways that you can approach this. You can either generate it locally or import it from an outside connection. If you choose to generate it locally, you have 2 options. You can either build a wind turbine or a small coal power plant. The wind turbine will be the best bet for you if you have a map that has lots of wind. It is expandable. You can add storage batteries, solar panels, and advanced rotaries to it to increase the power output. But even in its base state, 4 wind turbines cost the exact same amount as a coal power plant. It doesn't generate any air pollution, doesn't generate any ground pollution. It has the exact same amount of noise pollution, and it doesn't require a resource. So if you can build this, this is likely your best option. Unfortunately, on this map, you'll notice that it's fairly flat, and if you bring this wind turbine around, you can actually see it'll tell you how much electricity will be produced by the turbine in the location that you're in. And what I'm seeing is that generally around this starting area, we're generating about 1/5 of the amount of electricity that could be generated by this plant, and it will never improve because wind is a constant. So because of that, we won't go with wind turbines on this map, at least not in this location. So knowing that wind turbines won't work on this map, we could decide to build a small coal power plant. There's one main advantage to this plant. It produces a reliable amount of electricity, 20 megawatts, so long as you have coal going to the plant, which you can get from an outside connection. Additionally, it's a relatively inexpensive power plant relative to some of the other options that are available later in the game. But there are a number of disadvantages with this plant, specifically that you can't upgrade it at all. What you see is what you get, so you're likely going to need to decommission this in the future. So that's something that I personally am not super excited about. It also pollutes the ground and pollutes the air, so you have the same limitations with this coal power plant that you'd have with your industrial district. So for instance, couldn't place that right here. It'll pollute all of these neighborhood blocks back here. So the other option that we have that's new to Cities Skylines 2 is importing power from an outside connection. And the way that you do that is you convert your high voltage power line to low voltage power using a transformer. So I think that this is the approach that we'll take on this map. It is a bit more expensive to do this, but there's value in getting this set up right away because once you do have a power plant, these can operate in reverse and sell power to outside connections. So there's really no disadvantage in making this sort of transformer connection. So what we're going to do is line this up, and you can see that when you get close enough, the power lines will snap to it. And you might notice I am freely moving this anywhere that I want. That is one option. I could also snap this to the side of the road and have things connect up that way. You can also toggle your snapping if you're not fully satisfied with where things are lining up, and you'll have a little bit more flexibility, which is absolutely excellent. In this case, I think I actually want this to be right about here. I'm going to slide this back and free place this exactly where I want it to be. And now that we have that there, I'm going to go into our road menu, disable all of our toggles, and then enable snapping to the sides of a building and 90-degree angles. I'm doing this because I want to use the road to transmit power. Well, I could add a power line connecting the transformer to the road with an underground power line. I can also just add a road, and that will transmit power as well. That's a feature that's new to Cities Skylines 2 that I absolutely love, and you can get a view of this by clicking at your power menu, and you can see that there's now an underground power cable linking your transformer to the road, and the road to the bridge, and the bridge to the rest of the roadway network. Now we need to think about water and sewage. Now, unlike power, you can't import this from an outside connection to begin with, and that's because water and sewer require a connection to the very edge of your map. And since we're in the very middle, we're not going to be able to make that connection. So that means that we will have to produce this locally, and we're going to need to think about how we want to do that. So for fresh water, you have three options. You can use a water pumping station, which can extract water from a surface water source, such as a river or a lake. You have a water tower, which can pump water from basically anywhere on your map, but it's a bit more costly to maintain than the other options. Or you can pump water from an underground aquifer. And those are those little blue blobs that we were talking about earlier. And I want to zero in on this for 1 second, because if this is the route you decide to go and you decide to place this, you'll notice that groundwater reservoir usage appears. If you place too many extractors in a specific location, you can deplete an aquifer temporarily. So make sure that you're paying attention to that as you place these on an aquifer. I think for this map, because of the amount of surface water that we have, it likely makes the most sense to go with a water pumping station. So when you place a water pumping station, you've really got to think about where you're putting this relative to your sanitary sewer, which we'll be placing right after this. Because you want to place this upstream of your sewer for obvious reasons. The last thing you'd want to do is suck wastewater into your freshwater source. So I'm going to place that as far over here as we can, because these little arrows are telling me that the water is flowing this way. So I'll place that right about here. And if I can't exactly see what I'm doing, hitting the I button will bring me back to my normal view. And I find that this can be really helpful. I'm going to temporarily place this right here. And then we'll need to bring a road to this water pumping station so that we have water pipes connecting directly to this. And that happens because water pipes are actually built directly into the roads, right where they belong. And that also connects our power up because the power is connecting through our bridge. There is one thing I want to highlight though. You'll notice that water and sewage do not transmit through the bridge. So if you plan on needing to cross the water, you're going to need to add some other sort of pipe underneath the river, the water body, or underneath the bridge itself. I'm going to try to preempt this, and I'm going to send a water pipe right across the river. And now as we expand over on this side of the river, we won't have to worry about unexpectedly not having water for our city. And then the final utility that we need is a sewage outlet. And again, we need to place this downstream of your water pump. So we're going to place that way over here. And then interestingly, this doesn't actually need a road, so we could just place a sewage pipe if we wanted to. And now this is completely connected. It's good to go. It doesn't need a road. And with our utilities in place, we're ready to move on to zoning and progressing through the game. Before we start zoning, I want to talk a little bit about this demand meter right here, because at first blush, it might look identical to the one in Cities Skylines, and it is slightly different. So the green color is not all residential demand like in Cities Skylines, it's just low density residential demand. The blue is commercial demand, and the yellow is industrial demand. And as you level up and unlock other zoning types such as offices, medium density residential, and high density residential, those options will show in this menu as well. The other thing that I want to point out is this number right here, which is our progression milestone number. And if you hover over this, you can see the number of expansion points that you currently have. You earn expansion points by placing roads and buildings, and over time, as your city grows, you'll begin to get expansion points for happiness and population. So the moment we start zoning, we'll probably reach level 1. I'm going to focus my zoning along the coast to begin, and I think that we'll have a couple of residential properties. I'm leaving a little bit of a gap here because I want to place in some of our commercial. And one thing you'll notice is as soon as I place this, the demand meter responds. And you'll see that this is really dynamic, and this is something I really love about Cities Skylines too. And just like that, we've unlocked milestone 1, Tiny Village. We get a number of rewards for reaching this milestone. So let's take a look by going into our progression panel. Apparently we've also unlocked the Rockstar Mansion, which has some specific benefits. We'll go over that in just a moment as well. But looking at our progression milestones, we are unlocking $600,000, which sounds like a lot, but truthfully it's not in Cities Skylines 2. We're also unlocking 1 development point and 3 expansion permits. So the development points are used inside of the development tab, and this is how you can progress up your development trees. You've really got to think about these though, because these development points and development trees generally will have a significant impact on how your city develops. So for instance, if you really want to focus on trains, maybe you want to save some points for trains so that you can unlock it as soon as you reach milestone 4. To begin with, you'd be able to unlock roundabouts, road services, an emergency battery station, which could be helpful if you want to pursue geothermal power plants, hydroelectric or solar plants, a crematorium, and that's about it. So I would likely unlock the advanced road services first. There's a lot that you can do with this, so I'm going to unlock this and we'll go over it in just a moment. But I want to go back to the milestones because we've unlocked a bunch more. For the first time, we're able to take out a loan, so you can take out a $100,000 loan if you need it. We can unlock those map tiles that we talked about, 3 of them. We can now access our city budget, which can be helpful if we want to try to balance our budget. We can also take a look at our city statistics, and we now have row housing, both European and North American. We've unlocked a few new road options as well, including a 4-lane divided road, a 5-lane asymmetric road, which can be really helpful if you want to create turning pockets, and then 4 and 5-lane one-way roads. Don't use these when your city is this size. They're not appropriate. We've also unlocked a new bridge option and healthcare, death care, and garbage management. And whenever a city service unlocks, you're going to need to place it right away or deal with the consequences. So before we do anything, I want to purchase those tiles and start thinking about our waste management in our industrial area. So to purchase tiles, you go over to this map tiles button, click it, you'll zoom out. Now inside of this view, you can just purchase it as is, or you can even go into your info views and toggle some of your info views here. So if you wanted to look at air pollution or ground pollution, any of those things, if it were applicable to what you're doing, you could do that right here. In this instance, I already know that I want to buy this tile, and this tile. Now, the interesting thing is when you click on all these tiles, it'll aggregate your information here. So you'll know that you have fertile land, wood, ore deposits, groundwater, whatever it might be in these tiles. And if you inadvertently select a tile, you can right mouse click that tile and it will deselect them. You can also see the purchase price of these tiles, and you can see that for these 3 tiles, it's approximately $28,000. So we'll purchase these and those will immediately be added to our city. You don't have to purchase these connecting to your original starting tile, but keep in mind, if you started elsewhere, you're going to need to have access to the transportation network, and you'll likely need to add all new utilities for that new city. So let's begin by thinking about our waste management site. So we'll click on this garbage management button, and you'll notice that there's a little green icon above it. That means that there are new buildings available within this category, and I absolutely love this. It makes it easy to figure out what you need to do. Now within this tool, you'll notice none of our snapping options are enabled. We'll click on this button so that they all are enabled, just to snap into the sides of the road, and then we will show our contour lines as well, so we know that we're placing this in an appropriate location. So with our landfill, a couple of things to keep in mind. The landfill has an area that's associated with it. So the landfill building is one portion of this, and then the area tool will actually create the landfill itself. So you'll probably want to place the landfill on fairly flat ground, and then the area of the landfill can be on really any type of ground that you want. So I think in this instance, I'm going to place the landfill building right about here, and then we'll have the landfill go down the hill. Now to use this tool, you just place nodes and it will create a polygon around those nodes. And as you're placing these, you can see that the storage capacity is actually being modified in real time. If you inadvertently place a node, hit the right mouse button and that node that you just placed will disappear, and you can honestly get rid of all of your nodes in that way if you prefer. I think we'll start out with a smaller landfill to begin, and we'll expand this as we need to. And part of the reason I want to do that is I want to be cognizant of the sub-buildings that come with the landfill. To close this up, we just need to click on that final node here and it'll say complete area and tell us our total storage capacity. We can modify this at any point in the future and make it bigger or smaller if we want to. So once again, I'm going to snap to the sides of this building and I'm going to create a circulation pattern around this building. What I'm thinking is we'll have a connection to both entry and exit points in this building and then one to the front of the building. And you'll notice that the front of the building needs to have a road because it has this little icon here. And then we also need to provide access to our parking lots with a road as well. And once everything is satisfied, you'll see that there are no more blinking icons here. Now I'm going to connect all of these roads up with a main road that'll go down here, and then we'll link these alleys to that main road. Now we need to make a connection to our city. So I'm going to send this road down this way. And I want to think about the underground water source because I know that I want to have a geothermal power plant in the future and I do not want to make that impossible. So looking at our water pollution, I can see exactly where that underground water storage is, and I'm going to try to avoid sending the road right through that. Now we're going to switch over to our simple curve mode, and this is just like the curved road tool in Cities Skylines. You basically find a guideline that you want, click it, and then you can turn right into that road that you're trying to line up with. Now you might have noticed, we do not actually have power and water reaching this building, and the reason for that is that we have a highway right here. There are ways that we can solve this though. For power, now that we have our road services unlocked, we can actually add lighting to this road, and now this road will transmit power. So I'm going to click and drag along here, and that will allow us to bring power all along the road. For water, we actually have to add water pipes. So we're going to add a combined water and sewage pipe. I'm going to add those right underneath the road, right where they belong. To make sure that you're connecting up with the water pipe in the road, I want you to focus on one thing. As you come up to this, you'll notice that it kind of clips onto those pipes if you're close enough. So you may want to zoom in and pay close attention as you add these pipes. Same thing on this side. We'll see that connection to the pipes. These are a bit lower. Make the connection, and now we should see those icons disappear over here. And we are good to go. So a couple of things to know about your landfill. If you click on this, there are a couple of upgrades. We have a garbage truck depot, which will allow you to have 10 additional garbage trucks. We also have a hazardous waste management collection point, which will give you an extra 1 ton of processing capacity per month. And considering you only start with half a ton, that can be really, really critical and beneficial. And then you can also add a waste recycling unit, which will lower the ground pollution in this area. So the hazardous waste collection point is the only sub-building, and if you want to place these, you've got to leave space for them, either behind the building or on the sides, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to go crazy with this landfill area. Our other new requirement is healthcare and death care, and I think that this is an opportunity for us to start thinking about our central business district and core of this community, because I want to place these sorts of uses there. So I'm going to add the clinic right about here. It's in the very center of our community. But before we just walk away from this, I do want to look at this building and just check out the sub buildings to make sure that we're going to have space to expand in the future. So I'm going to look at this extension wing, and you can see that I have room behind this and on the side. The ambulance depot is actually a building that exists within the footprint of the building, so we don't have to worry about that all that much. So this would seem to be a good place for this specific asset. And then we also have to place death care, which is available in the same tab. And this is a considerably larger building. I'm going to hit I so I can see the map again. And what I think we're going to do for this is place this right along here. Now, this will break up our grid, but I'm not overly concerned about that. Grids break, and that's what makes your city interesting, at least if you're building along a gridiron plan. Now, there's an interesting thing about this specific asset that you can notice as you hover over it. A cemetery adds 3 to the well-being of citizens within 300 meters, and it adds 3 to indoor recreation. So this is not just a cemetery, it's actually a recreational asset as well, which I think is really reasonable because you often see that there are runners or people walking through cemeteries as well. So it's something to consider when you're placing this asset. And now I want to think just a little bit about our industrial site over here. And again, we need to think about our underground water because we're going to use that for our geothermal power plant in the future. And now I'll pop out of here because I want to join this road up with this existing intersection. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to minimize the number of conflict points that I have. And this is something that's brand new to City Skylines 2 with traffic accidents, is conflict points actually matter. So generally, you want to minimize the number of conflict points so that you don't have accidents, conflict points being interchanges that are unnecessary. So in this instance, we're going to have this traffic signal right here with two roads coming in and meeting up with this intersection. And now I'll build a basic grid over here for our industrial area. And rather than coming up with the exact same grid that we have over here, industrial sites are different, and we're going to acknowledge that by building on a different grid. So I think what we'll go with over here is going to be 112 meters by 176. And that's basically double the size of the block that we're using across the street. Now, obviously, this is a space constrained area, so we're going to have to make some modifications, but at least we have a target. So this area right here is a little bit challenging to work with. We've got some significant terrain challenges, and I want to resolve those by doing a little bit of terraforming. So we're going to go into our landscaping menu and attempt to improve this a little bit, make it a little bit more friendly to development. So we've got 4 different terrain altering tools available to us, and we'll go through each of them one by one. The first is the Shift Terrain tool, and this allows you to simply raise or lower your terrain. If you click the left mouse button, terrain goes up, right mouse button, terrain goes down. The next tool is the Level Terrain tool. And with this tool, you can right mouse click a certain terrain height and then use your left button to move that terrain height all over the place, which can be really beneficial if you want to pre-grade a site. In fact, that's likely what we're going to do over here. Next, we have the Soften Terrain tool. And what this allows you to do is basically average out the terrain. So let's say we had a slight hill right here. We wanted to smooth that out. Going into our Soften Terrain tool, we grab the edge of that and pull that height and average it out over a wider place. And then finally, we have our Slope Terrain tool. So let's say we have a hill right here, and we want to average out our height between this location and this location here. We right mouse click at the top of this hill, move to the location we want to start our slope, left click and pull towards this location. We get a perfect slope right up here. This is invaluable when you're pre-grading for roads. If you're creating interchanges or things of that nature, this can really be helpful. But it can also be helpful when you're grading for a neighborhood, trying to create a slope that won't look incredibly terrible when you're building buildings on it. But for now, this was flat. We're going to keep it flat. And I want to talk a little bit about the brush size and the brush strength. This is one of my favorite features of this new terraforming tool. You have a lot of fine grain adjustments that you can make. So let's say you want to adjust things in a very fine way. You can have a brush size as low as 10, and look at how small this is. So if you wanted to raise this up, teeny tiny little berm right there, which can be really helpful. Conversely, you can level a wide area if you wanted to. I don't want to do this, but you could if you wanted. And you can also adjust the strength. So if you want to take things a little more slowly, you can revise your strength down. And when you're terraforming and just getting used to it, I highly recommend you do this because you'll be able to do things like soften your terrain at 25% strength, and it'll just take a little bit longer, which will prevent you from making silly mistakes. And those are the sorts of things that are really challenging because there is no way to undo your mistake. So oftentimes I just try to take things slowly by reducing the brush strength. Now in this area, we've already built the roads. So I'm going to take a step back and attempt to fix this by adding a guideline road right here temporarily. And then we'll delete this road. And I want to level the terrain out just a little bit. We'll come at this with maybe a 50% brush strength. And I'm going to right mouse click right here where the intersection is and pull this over. And then here I just right mouse clicked up and down the road to try to pull that terrain height out. And if I wanted to, I could have even just pulled the height out up here and used the Slope Terrain tool and sloped up this way. Either way works just fine. The reason I wanted to do that is we're going to soften the terrain, which will make everything look a lot more planned and manicured. And now that we've done that, we can add our road back in here. And you'll see that this is just a much more developable site now that we've graded this out a little bit. I'm also going to send a road right about here, and then we'll meet up with this road. Now you might have noticed I overshot this. That's not a huge concern. We're going to go into our Simple Curve tool, and I'll pull this up till I reach my 90, which I can tell that I've reached because there's a little square icon at that intersection down there. And then I'll click on this road and pull it over until I get the curve that I want. Now I will end this and I can delete this little segment here, and I have the perfect road coming right over to this location. And now we'll get to adding some industrial to this site. And again, I'm going to avoid adding it on this side of the road. You have a couple of different ways that you can fill in your zoning areas. You can either just use your paint bucket, which will just fill it in, or you can use your marquee tool, which will allow you to basically select a specific area and only zone in that location. Or you could use your paint tool, which will allow you to fill in one cell at a time. I want to point one thing out quickly. We just received points for population and for happiness. And those points alone, those expansion points, will help us reach our progression milestone if we build nothing else. So as you're building, as you're simulating, you're going to reach those milestones if you are patient enough. And you also can't slow the march of progress unless you're on pause. So now that we've added these new industrial sites, all of our residential options have spring back to life, and they want us to zone a whole bunch of residential and commercial. So we are going to add a whole bunch of low density residential. We're going to do that before we add our row homes, because I want to rezone to add those row homes. I think that's a much more natural way of developing. So we're going to add in commercial, maybe along this main corridor here. It wouldn't be a very desirable place to live. And then we will add some of our single family homes away from there. Now, let's say you don't want to go with the North American homes everywhere. You can select a different theme, such as the European theme, and have a block or two of these homes. Or you could switch your entire map to those and only zone these if that's your preference. So I'm going to do that. We'll simulate different developers developing these areas and add a little bit. We can switch right back and forth if we want to. And now we'll switch over to our commercial zones. And once again, it's always good to think of having commercial mixed into your neighborhoods. These are the sorts of places where maybe you can grab a slice of pizza, a cup of coffee, or some gas if you need that. And these are all really important to have mixed right in with your residential. And thankfully in Cities Skylines 2, there is no sound penalty for that. So you can mix your uses just as they would be mixed in real life. Now, I do want to highlight one thing you have to be careful about. So I just carefully drew in these couple of commercial districts in the middle of this neighborhood. And if I just wholesale sweep across here, I will rezone that area. So your better option here is likely to use your paint bucket. If you use this, it will zone around this existing zoning rather than straight through it. Your marquee tool is probably better for areas that you're either trying to rezone or don't have zoning already. And after waiting just a couple moments, we've unlocked milestone 2, Small Village. And we receive a number of things for reaching this milestone. So let's check out our progression panel. First thing you'll notice is that we have $700,000, which is really helpful because we are currently losing money. We also have development points that we've unlocked, 2 of them, so that we could unlock things in our development tree. And we have 4 expansion permits to purchase new tiles if we choose to do so. We've also unlocked additional loans, the ability to adjust our taxes to maybe resolve some of this issue that we have with our budget, and new medium density housing options. And finally, we've unlocked elementary schools and high schools, and because these are city services, they will now be required. So let's slow things down for a moment so we can add those schools before we increase our density. And the schools are found underneath education and research. We have our elementary school here and our high school right here. Now, the capacity of the elementary school is fairly large, but you're likely going to need more of these than high schools. So keep that in mind. I'm going to hit I so I can see where I'm placing these, and I have the contours on so I can make sure that I'm not placing it on a hill. And I think that we're going to try to locate this fairly centrally for the time being. So we'll place that right about here on Hillside Street. And I did not name that road. It's just a great name. So this road is actually along 2 hillsides. I love that. I might actually shift this building over to center it up with Spring Street here, and we could even create a bus drop-off loop or something like that if we wanted to as well. And truthfully, maybe we should do that. I'll pull this building over to the side for a minute using my relocate button after clicking on the building itself, and then we'll use an alley to create a bus drop-off loop. I'm going to add a roundabout to the end of this street here, and that will be what the buses can loop around on. And now we can move this building into place. And again, we'll use our relocate button. And this time around, I'm going to hit the I button so I can see exactly what I'm doing. And we're going to disable all of our snapping options so that I can completely control where this building is going. And I'll use the right mouse button and spin my mouse just a little bit so that I can rotate the building around, and I can place this exactly as I want. And that looks considerably better in my mind. Now, one thing that you'll need to consider with the elementary school is that there are a few upgrades available. We have the children's clinic, which can help children recover from injuries faster. So it's 5% increase in health for your students. We can also add an extension wing so that we can serve more students in this particular school. And we can add a playground. Now, this playground adds benefits beyond the school, so I would highly encourage you to think about placing these at every single school. It adds a 10% well-being bonus within 300 meters of the school, so it's incredibly valuable from that regard. And it also adds a 5% well-being bonus for all the students here. So it's just a good thing all around. It's relatively low upkeep, and it's relatively inexpensive. This is a sub-building though, so it will need to attach to the school. So you'll need to be thoughtful about where you place this. And if you place it on a hill, you're probably going to have a bad time. And the reason for that is that if you place a sub-building, it becomes a part of this main building. And if you want to move it or relocate it or delete it, it deletes the entire building. So before I place this, I'm going to grade around the school. And I'm doing this so that the playground is at the same elevation as the school. I cannot fix that after the fact. And we place that right here. We could also add a children's clinic if we wanted to, but I think I might hold off on this one because we don't have many students. And then the extension wing actually is within the footprint of the building, so we don't need to worry about reserving space for that. And before we move on from our elementary school, I want to talk a little bit about what this does. If we go into our info views and look at education, we can see the distribution of education for our citizenry. Uneducated citizens are citizens that have no formal education at all. Poorly educated are citizens that have attended elementary school but have gone no further. Educated are people who have completed high school. Well-educated are people who have completed college. And highly educated are people who have completed university. And you see that all right here, the breakdown of the demand. You can see that there are 49 citizens that are eligible for elementary school, 28 for high school, 147 for college, and nobody is eligible for university. So this can be really illustrative in figuring out what your citizens actually need in terms of education. And I can see that we have a need for high school, and that will actually impact our employment as well. So we're going to build a high school right away. Knowing that we need fewer high schools than elementary schools, we're going to place this maybe in a little less central of a location, and a location that will allow us to expand this a little bit more, knowing that our sports stadium is absolutely massive. So I think we're going to place that right over here. But again, I want to add a loop for our buses first, and I'm going to extend a road up here, and then we'll add an access road right here. And this is the road that I'm going to place the high school on. Now this time around, I am going to snap to the side of a road, and you can see that everyone loves that I've placed the high school right here. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. There are multiple parking lots. We need to make sure that those are connected with roads if we didn't already have that. If we deleted this road right here, for instance, you'll see that this parking lot desperately wants to be connected to a road. In fact, what I think that we'll do is clean up this small road to line up with the parking lots. And now that looks really, really good. Now, the high school has a couple of upgrades. You can add an extension wing. This goes right within the footprint of the building. The extension wing adds 400 to the student capacity. The school library will increase the graduation rate of the high school. And again, that is within the footprint of the building. And then you can add a sports field, which will add 40 to outdoor recreation, will actually increase the health of the students and citizens in the surrounding area. Now, this is a massive building and it needs to clip onto the side of your high school. So you need to really think about where you're placing this up front. I think that we are going to place this. It does have about $15,000 per month in upkeep, but it's relatively inexpensive as far as parks go. And right now we don't have any parks available to us, so we might as well place these. Once again, I am going to grade in advance so that the sports field is at the same elevation as the high school. And then I think I'm going to leave a couple of units separation so that maybe we can add a parking lot dedicated to the sports field in the future once we unlock parking lots. And now this building should be fully operational. And then finally, I want to start to think about some of our medium density residential demand. We have a growing medium density residential demand, and there's two ways that we could fulfill this. We could either add on to our city, and that's one approach that we will probably take, or we could rezone. Before we add on, I am going to rezone just a little bit. So we'll go into our zoning menu and we have two options for medium density housing. We have row homes, and you can see that it's medium density because it says North American medium density row home. And then we have our North American medium density housing. These are apartments. So let's go with a little bit of both. And one of the tips I'll give you is just to not overdo it, particularly with the medium density housing in a small town. You could just rezone a small area and it will look very natural. So let's go with maybe a 6x6 area right here. We'll rezone this. And I want to delete these buildings right away. Otherwise, we'll have multiple small buildings zone in. So you could tell the height that this building will be because of the size of its crane. So we are going to delete this and try to get something smaller. And the way that we can get a smaller building is actually to reduce the footprint of the building itself. So we will change our zoned area, maybe shrink this in half and see what we come up with. And I think this is still a bit taller than I want it to be. So I will dezone a portion of this, delete this, and speed this along. And now we will get some smaller height buildings. And now we finally have cranes here, and you can see that this is about half the height of the other buildings that we were looking at having built in this area. Now, I want to expand the city a little bit in this direction. And what I'm thinking that we're going to do is create a new roadway grid in this area. So this is something that I think can make your cities feel really organic. Cities often develop in a patchwork. So rather than developing a large area and having a sprawling grid across your entire city, think of creating multiple smaller grids and iterating on them over time. Also, don't get too complicated with your designs. Things happen for reasons. You don't end up with a complicated interchange because some planner just wanted it. You end up with a complicated interchange because there was a traffic problem that needed to be addressed over time. So in this particular instance, I'm going to go back into our landscaping tools to start out with because I noticed there's a little bit of a bump here and I want to resolve that. So we're going to delete this and I'm going to lower the terrain here by a couple of meters. And those contour lines signify 1 meter in elevation difference. So if I grab this here, I'll drop this down by 2 meters. Now, once again, we'll go back into our continuous road tool. We'll run that underneath the bridge, and then I'll run a new road right along the coast. And this one I want to be very parallel. This is where our new grid will begin. And for this grid, we'll do the exact same thing that we were doing over here in terms of the size. The orientation will just be slightly different. So we'll come up 88 meters here, and we'll go 112 meters over. And now here's where we start to have conflicts with our existing buildings, and that is not a big deal. What we're going to do over here is attempt to merge these grids together. So we're going to use our curved road tool with all of our snap twos on. I'm going to reach this guideline right here. I'm going to click in the middle of the guideline and pull this right into the center of this intersection. And on this side, we're going to do something slightly different. We are going to run into conflicts if we try to run a road right along the side of the building because this intersection will be a little bit too wonky, and you can tell because we have overlapping items showing up. So we'll just scoot this out 1 unit, run this to right about here, and then we'll use our curved road tool to connect up really nicely. And then I've added this new road right here that is 88 meters from this road. So that is our transition point right there. I think it looks really, really good. And then I want to make a connection between this new grid and our old one so I can run a local road right through this arterial, and we have a perfect connection. That is beautiful. Now, I created these blocks because I wanted to add a bit of row housing somewhere else in the city, and I think we need to replace the single-family homes that we're about to demolish. So we're going to continue with our single-family homes right along the coast. And then as we wait for these to fill in, I want to go over a couple of the icons that we're seeing. Right here, we have an icon that says high rent. And this is an icon that you'll see if you're not keeping up with zoning demand. This means that basically the land value in your city is continuing to increase as the demand for properties remains relatively strong. So this is very similar to what you'd see in real life. In cities that don't have enough housing built for all the people that want to live there, the housing prices get all out of whack. This is exactly what you see in a place like San Francisco that just simply needs more housing. So if you don't want your city to have the same housing problems that San Francisco has, build lots of housing when the demand is there. This other icon right here is over our commercial building, and it says that they can't find enough employees. And when you see this, it means that they are missing a specific employee category, and we can see that they are missing well-educated employees. Well-educated employees are employees that have gone to college, so that might mean that we need to start thinking about investing in a college in the near future. But before we do any of that, I want to talk a little bit about the road tools that we unlocked earlier in our road services menu, because these are really outstanding. So this is a little bit like TNPE Lite. If you've played Cities Skylines, you have the ability to make a couple of modifications to your roadway network. And right here, you can see that at every intersection with this arterial and a local road, we get a traffic signal. And you might decide that that is not what you want. You can click on the traffic lights here, right mouse click and remove them. And this can be really, really helpful. Conversely, if you want to add traffic signals to an area where maybe it's not there already, you can just left click and you'll add a traffic signal to that area. This can be really helpful if you want to add priority to a certain street. Generally, you'd want to have signals if you have a lot of traffic. It'll prevent accidents and things of that nature, and potentially get people through a junction that would otherwise be impossible if signals weren't there. You can also add stop signs, and at this current point in time, you can only add 4-way stops. In the future, I'm hoping that this is a little bit more granular, but it's the exact same thing as traffic signals. If you want to add it, you left click it. If you want to remove it, you right mouse click it, and now they're gone. You can also control turns, and this can be really, really cool. So let's say you don't want anyone to turn left on Emerson Street because you want to maintain your traffic flow through this area. Go into your no left turn, click on this roadway segment, and now nobody can turn left on Emerson Street. Right mouse click, and that turn returns. And now on this street right here, Birch Street, I want to do something a little bit more special. I want to have a tree-lined median. We've unlocked a new medium road that actually has a divider in the middle. So we're going to use our replace tool that we used earlier to upgrade this road. And the reason that we're doing this is I want a whole bunch of flexibility to add terraces to this road. So if you have the road with the median, you're able to add a green terrace in the center or on either side. I want to add it to the center to make this place feel really grand as you're entering it. And then we can add trees as well. And you can add those either to the center or the sides if you decided to place your terraces on the side. Now, if you want to do a whole road like this all at once, click on one end and hold and go to the other end, and you'll add trees or whatever sort of option you're adding to the road all the way up and down the road. And you can see that now that we've done that, we've got trees all the way up Birch Street, and it feels like we should have trees on Birch Street considering its name. Now let's do a bit of rezoning now that our medium demand has come back. And I want to add some row homes. We're going to rezone in some of our oldest parts of our community. I'm going to hit I, and I'm going to increase the density of the zoning in this area near our little commercial district. So I'm going to go into our marquee tool because with row homes, there's a couple of things to consider. You want to prioritize buildings facing a certain street to make them look nice. So I'm going to prioritize them facing Garnett, Hillside, and Emerson streets. So to do that, I'm going to leave a 1-unit gap in between the zoning and the side streets, Spring and Pearl. And then I'm going to pause this for just a moment and delete all these buildings. The reason I'm doing that is I want all of these row home lots to be exactly the same. And if I were to just let these fill in as things dezone, all of the lots would be different sizes. And I think with row homes in particular, consistency is king. And now as soon as these start to fill in, I can add the zoning along that side street. And because there are no 1-by-1 buildings in Cities Skylines 2, you won't see a bunch of crazy stuff zone in here. You will see this fill in with a row home. And just like that, we've reached milestone 3, Large Village. We've got a lot of stuff that we've unlocked at this milestone. We've now unlocked our service budgets so we can modify the amount of money that we are spending on each of our city services to try to more closely align them with our demand. We can also build livestock farms, stone mines, fire and rescue, which we're absolutely going to do, and police stations. And once again, because fire and police are city services, we're going to need to take care of those right away. We've also unlocked 3 more development points and 5 additional expansion permits so we can continue to grow our city if we want to. I think for the time being, we'll continue to bank our development points and our expansion permits and focus on the area that we've already unlocked. And let's just take a look at these row homes, and you can see that this looks really outstanding right here, all in a nice row, all facing the same street, and that is exactly what we were going for. Now, we do need to take care of these city service needs that we have, and I'm going to add the fire and rescue and the police station in this general area around Birch Street. So we'll add our fire station right here off Hillside Street, and we'll add our police station right about here. Now for our fire station, we've got one upgrade. That is a garage extension, and that works within the footprint of the building. For our police station, it's the exact same story, so we don't have to worry all that much about the space needs of these 2 buildings. So knowing that these do not have sub-buildings, I think I'm going to try to move them to be a bit closer together, and I'm going to turn off snapping to see if it's possible to fit the fire station right here off Aspen Street. And you can see that with a bit of patience, I was able to sneak that in right here by turning off our snapping to roads and moving it around. So this is almost like having Move It built in if you played Cities Skylines 1, and it is outstanding. And then we'll rezone this area with a bit of commercial. And I think that we'll leave a vacant lot right here for future expansion of our commercial or other city services. Now our city's moving in a pretty good direction, but one thing I would like to do is do just a little bit of decorating along the coast. So what I think we'll do is remove most of the trees along the coast, and then we'll add some sort of pedestrian amenity right here. So to remove the trees, I'm just going to click on one tree with the bulldozer, and then as long as you highlight the trees, you'll start to notice that we get this blue outline. And as long as you finish on a tree, everything in the blue outline will disappear at once. So we're going to do that on both sides of our bridge. And then we'll go into our landscaping menu and add some pathways. So I absolutely love the pathways in Cities Skylines too, because they're incredibly flexible and you can do a lot with them as long as you're willing to experiment a little bit. So we are going to basically send a path down from the center of this road, and then we're going to turn off our snap twos except for our 90-degree angles and go into our continuous mode. And this will allow us to create a meandering path. And the really fun thing about these paths is if you line them up with roads, they'll add crosswalks. So you can plan ahead and even think about how these might interact with your existing roadway network. And you can see that that is a nice little path right there. Might be a couple of spots that I'd like to get a bit more curvy. So we'll need to snap to existing geometry now. And we'll turn on our guidelines as well. We've done that for the sake of visual interest. And now I want to add a couple of more connections so people use this in a more recreational and utilitarian way. So we'll add connections to our existing roads. And then you'll notice that I inadvertently added a crosswalk right here. I actually think that I like this location for a crosswalk, and we'll add one on this side as well. And this will allow us to get rid of these weird crosswalks that are occurring at angles. So we'll pop into our road services, click on crosswalk, right mouse click that crosswalk, and we can remove it. And to me, that makes a ton more sense. You can also use these pedestrian facilities to block zoning, which is something that I often use them for as well. And then finally, I want to add some vegetation along the sides of this path. And I want you to really focus on a couple of things here. So first of all, we are in our North American theme here. So we've got North American trees available to us. So right up in the upper left, you'll notice we have a pine tree. But if we go over to our European theme, this is now an alder. So there are multiple different types of trees available. The bushes, I believe, are for the most part the same across continents. But if you want a bit more variation and variety, feel free to switch between themes and you'll see even more trees. Now I think we've got to plant some young lindens right along the coast, especially now that our young lindens will become old lindens over time. And then we will add a couple of alder trees through here. And I like to point these ones out for a specific reason. If you zoom into the tree, you'll notice that there's this little blue box around the tree. That is the growing zone for this tree. So this is, when it's an adult tree, that is the size that it will take up. So you cannot overlap trees. They will not work if you try to place them too close to one another. Those blue boxes cannot overlap. So this is something to keep in mind as you're planting trees. You'll need to give enough space for the tree to grow. Now for your bushes, they do not have this little area around them, but they will grow just a little bit and they'll also change colors, which is something that I think is really outstanding. So plant as many bushes as you'd like. You can also push these into each other just a little bit so that you can create a wall of bushes if you choose to do so. I think in this location though, we're just going to add some wild green bushes kind of randomly through this area to give a little bit more variety to our vegetation. We've added a couple over here, but this isn't the most efficient way to handle this. If you want to place a whole bunch of these in a larger area, you can actually go into your place multiple mode, which will allow you to actually paint these like a brush. So you can select a specific type of vegetation, grab a brush size, which here's where 200 might be beneficial for you, and then adjust your brush strength. So in this particular instance, I think we'll take this down to maybe about 100, which is about the width of this area along the coast. And then we'll take our brush strength down to maybe 25. And then we'll just paint this along the coast. Yeah, and I like the way that that looks a ton better than what I did by hand. So I think we'll even take that over here and do the exact same thing. So let's say you don't like this though, and you want to change it. You can increase your brush strength size and then right mouse click this, and it will get rid of only the type of tree or bush that you have selected. So this can be really helpful if you make a mistake, so keep this in mind. And before we move on from this, I want to talk a little bit about tree growth because trees take a long time to grow. So right here, we've got our young linden and it produces 2 lumber. So trees are fundamentally tied to the amount of wood that they can produce. And this is tied to your lumber industry. So that's one of the reasons why all of the trees start so young and small. Over about a year and a half, you'll see that this will become a full-size tree. After 1 year, it'll produce 2/3 of the amount of wood that it would normally produce, and it'll be a fairly decent size. But for now, this is what we get. So if you want to have a new forest, you'll likely need to use your forestry brush to paint one. And that's something that you probably shouldn't do a ton of early game because it's very expensive. So keep that in mind. If there's a specific spot that you want to see trees in the future, by all means go for it, but it will be very costly. So you should do so judiciously until you have lots of money. We're going to rapid fire through a couple of things that I think are also very important. Right here, we have our happiness meter, and you should constantly be paying attention to this. You can figure out why your citizens are not happy by looking at this meter quickly. And you can see that for this city, the taxes are too high. They're not happy about that. We have poor educational services and unreliable healthcare coverage. So those might be things that we want to consider in the future, but for education and healthcare, it's -1, so it's not that big of a deal right now. You can also see that people love living here because they have spacious homes and they're wealthy. Now, this meter goes hand in hand with this button right here, the city information. If you click on this, you can learn why you have demand for certain zoning categories, or maybe why you don't have demand for certain zoning categories. So for our low density residential, for instance, we can see that citizens are unhappy about high taxes and unoccupied buildings, but the reason there's strong demand is the number of jobs that are available and the happiness of the citizens that currently live here. And it's basically the same story here for our medium density residential. We can see the exact same thing for commercial and industrial, and this can really be helpful if you're trying to troubleshoot why you have demand issues. And then lastly, I mentioned signature buildings, and I want to look at just the one that we've unlocked. We unlocked our Rock Musician Mansion, and similar to some of the other buildings that we've placed, adding these signature buildings will add unique benefits. So for the Rock Musician Mansion, for instance, it'll add 2 well-being within 500 meters of this building. And interestingly, this building is completely free to place, so there's not much of a reason not to place this building. I think we'll place that right on this hill up here. Seems like a place where you might see a Rock Musician Mansion. We want to make sure that we spin this around so that the road is facing towards our road over here. And we'll plop that right here. And then I'm going to use an alley to reach this building. And just like that, our Rock Musician will have an excellent view of all the smog coming from our industrial district. But this is a very beautiful asset. You can see that I didn't fully connect this, but it is operational. But for the sake of my own sanity, I will extend this just a bit further so we're completely connected. And then knowing that we're gonna have a rock musician that lives here, I added trees all the way around here to create a parcel. And this adds a little bit of character to your city, so I'd highly recommend you take a little bit of time to add these buildings and decorate around them. And with that, I think we've got a great little start for our city. There's only one more thing that we have left to do, and that's take inventory of what we've done and have a brief city tour. During the city tour, we passed 1,000 in population, and I think we have the bones of a great little community. I can't wait to keep building this with you in subsequent episodes, and if there are any specific topics that you'd like to see me discuss before others, please let me know down in the comments. And I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. And I really want to thank you for your time today. There's a ton of things that you could have been doing. You decided to hang out with me, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.